Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 5 of TNCBA's Chasing Ghosts. You know, in the Southeast, there's some lakes out there that when you hear their name, you just think big bass. And Chickamauga Lake is one of those places. In this episode of Chasing Ghosts, we're headed to Chickamauga Lake for the 2-day classic for the Tennessee Team Trail. It's a unique opportunity for us to fish a multiple day event, put in a practice day before. Now, I'm going to say I don't recommend the way we practice, especially it being the Friday right before, but we were going down there. We were looking to catch some fish. We weren't worried about burning some of these things up. We wanted to catch some fish on a frog. We wanted to catch them out of the grass. We wanted to have a good time. So let's dive into the practice video, and then we'll talk about both days of the event as well. So when we got down there for practice, we kind of retraced our steps from where we had been at the beginning of the year with the club in April. We went back in the same slough, just a little bit further back, and tested out some of these grass mats. Didn't get a lot of bites back here, but we did catch this nice one on a frog, and then you'll see later on in the video that Dad catches a nice one on day one of the tournament back here. Saw some action, saw some activity, saw some other boats, but just never really could get a lot going back here in this slough or in really thick grass mats for us, to be completely honest. So it was fun to catch this frogfish. It's what I went down there to do. But later on we kind of changed things up and pulled out on some points that were going into these creeks, and we were able to get a few fish on rattle traps doing that. And you can see here on this point in that picture that it's just going down that break line along that flat point, and kind of ripping that rattle trap up out of some grass. Now we also moved back into some pockets to keep these fish honest that might be pushing some shad into the backs of the pockets and schooling, and we found schooling action in here, but there wasn't the same type of quality that we were finding around the grass or out there on those points. And we came back into this later on in the tournament, and it really just it fizzled out. It let us down. It never materialized to anything.
Take 5 of those. It's so much fun. It's so much fun. I think we have to look small. You looking?
Now here later on into the day, we've made our way on down. This is in Eldridge Slough, and it's kind of hard to see, but you can see the calm section right there next to the bank, and that's the shoreline grass that I'm talking about. And it doesn't come out very far, maybe 10, 15 feet, 20 feet at the most. And there was shad all around this stuff, and there's more sporadic grass out towards the boat, but that's the only place where it's kind of matting up. And that's really we found a really good consistent bite as far as frogs or throwing buzz baits around it, was that shoreline grass, and that really paid off for us there day one of practice.
They were no, after I hooked him, another one went ballistic right next to him.
So this final stop of the day right here, keep it in mind, my battery dies on day 2, so you don't get to see us come back here. But on day 2 of the tournament, the wind direction is identical to what we have here, and it's late in the day when we come back. We put it at the very end of our rotation, and there were fish schooling up in this grass on this edge and right near this drop, and it played a huge part in us being able to salvage a check at the end of this tournament. So this point was key in our success on day 2. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the situations that we had going into this classic. So we had just had a front roll through the Thursday, right before we got down there on Friday. There had been tons of rain. Weather had been somewhat warm. You're going to see a cooling trend going over these next few days. The mornings are going to be really cold. So we're dealing with post-frontal conditions. That's going against us. While we're out here fishing, we're looking for fish in the grass, but the water is also falling. And one thing that you noticed from that video, we really were keying in on some shoreline grass, some not big grass mats. But the issue was that shoreline grass wasn't in deep water. So as the water's falling, you're losing more and more of that grass mat that you do have, that shoreline grass that you do have. So that was kind of playing against us as we were fishing. And as we get into day one, we have to start to make some transitions. We caught some fish on the frog there on Friday during practice and really should have had our hooks been in. But again, we knew things were going to be changing. We don't get many opportunities to go down to Chick. So I wanted to catch some frogfish. That's what I was going to do. But we had to adjust here on day one. And you're going to see also that the wind had completely flip-flopped on us. Winds coming from a different direction, bluebird skies, high pressure. It's colder. So in that case, we have to make some small adjustments, move out on these points a little bit more, and we end up getting a little bit of a hint onto this trap bite that's going to help us out even later on in day two. So as I said, we start out here in this slough that we had caught fish in back in April, and Dad's fishing that buzz bait, and he's able to work it over tops of some of these little sporadic pads and get it into these open spaces between. And this first fish of the day comes up and eats that buzz bait and then gets him hung up in the grass. And it's of course a blood pumping moment because you're trying to get to him, you're trying to keep him pegged, and it's not the same as throwing that frog and having it on braid where you can just winch him out of there. But luckily we have a great start to the day. But man, did it just slack off after that, and it took a while before we got bit again. And finally later on around about noontime, we finally make our way back down towards Eldridge Slough here, but you can see the winds coming from a different direction, and we stop on the point this time, and you can see a mud line starting to form. There's some grass patches up there, and we start to throw some rattle traps into it and rip those out. And as we start to get bit on this, we get multiple bites here. That really tells us that some things are changing. The frog bite has died for us. I know I saw some people catch some on a frog in the tournament. But again, you got to listen to those fish and what's going on. So we start keying in on these points. And you see me lose this one right here. He comes unbuttoned, but it was a small fish. But then we throw right back in there, and you're going to see that we double up, and we look like a couple of fools trying to get those fish in here in just a second. But as I hook into mine, Dad sets the hook into one as well, but mine goes to the left and his kind of goes to the right, and they get crossed up. And as we're fighting those fish in, Dad's fish is caught over my line, and then he's lifting his out of the water, which causes me to have a bow in my line, and I can't fight my fish anymore, so I'm yelling at him. It was a big mess. We look like a couple of fools right here.
Making a big buck, it needs leverage.
So as you saw there on day one, things started out really well for us. Dad was throwing that buzz bait kind of through the sporadic grass areas. And we started out the day in practice and we started out day one back there in that slough. And we had a little bit larger of a grass mat there, probably the largest grass mat we fished anywhere. Most of the rest of it was that shoreline grass that we had been focusing on. And we had gotten only one good bite out of it each day, one good bite in practice on that frog, and then one good bite out of it on that buzz bait. And after we moved away from that, we went for a long period of time without any bites. And we checked a schooling area that we had found there on practice, day one of practice, and never could get anything to bite in there. Things that we did catch later on in the day back there were smaller. We went back to those points. We pulled into Eldridge Slough on that point, and we started to catch some fish. And they were schooling up in that mud line. That wind was blowing across through there. But again, and I talked about in the last video on Watauga, looking for those flat areas, those long points or those flats near some deep water, where those fish are pushing up to feed. And that was where we were able to get our bites. And we got onto that quick flurry there and really thought things were turning around. We now had 3 fish in the boat. But unfortunately, and you can see the fish here that we weighed in, that's all we could manage for day one. And it really put us behind the 8 ball. We only had around 7 to 8 pounds at that point. So going into day two, we weren't sitting way out. I think we were sitting in the mid 20s there. So it was tough on everybody. But the way practice had gone was really expecting some more. Now we're going into day two. And day two, we know it's going to be even colder starting out. And then we get hit with a fog delay. So now in our minds, things are starting to run through. Okay, we've been catching them back there in that one slough, that one mat early in the day. Do we try to run back there? Now we're not as early a draw, we're a later draw. So other people might be getting back in there before we do. So a lot of things are starting to run through our mind. Ultimately, though, as we talk through this day two, you're going to see that fog delay played a huge part in us being in the right location at the right time for the feeding windows. Now, one of the places that we caught fish, or the last frog bite that you saw there in the practice video, is where we're going to end the day. And we ended up changing it in a rotation. I went to it too early on day one. We never got a bite there. But on day two, again, thinking about that feeding window, we got bit there late in the day on practice. And as you're going to be able to tell, the wind's coming from the same direction. Unfortunately, my battery died. You don't get to see the fish that we catch right there at the very end. We put 3 in the boat really quick, actually 4, and cull 1 out. But that point right there comes back to play a huge role, and that feeding window being at that same time as it was in practice. So again, thinking about your rotation, thinking about those feeding windows that you had in practice are important. Go back to those. So again, check out this day two action. It's short-lived. I didn't get a lot of our bites, but I'll still talk through it and talk about the adjustments that we did make and how we changed our rotation during that day with the fog delay that we had. Now, after a rough start to the morning on day two with the fog delay and stuff, we changed things up drastically. We ran all the way down towards Chester Frost. This one fish here is our first fish of the day, and it comes on a rattle trap, ripping it up out some of this grass. It's not a very big keeper, but it's something in the boat, calms us down a little bit. But after this, we make an adjustment, and just to go put some fish in the boat, we run over to this bluff that you're going to see here. And the thing is, the current on this bluff was ripping, but the wind was going in the opposite direction. So the waves were huge, and there were some really good eddies that had formed. And we knew from past experience and talking with some of the other guys traveling with us that there were some spots on this wall. So we were going to put some fish in the box. And we ended up catching 2 keeper spots here, very small, but again, something that kind of calmed me down, helped me go back through my thought process again. And later on, when we moved back to that final point, we were able to actually cull out one of the smaller spots that we caught here. But this was still big, guys. Go into an area, putting some fish in the box, and calming yourself down is going to help you think more clearly later on. But here we picked up a Kitech 2.8. It's always our go-to for putting some fish in the box or getting some bites. And it's key to know some of these areas where you can go get some keeper fish on a tough day. So as you saw in that last day, we really had to change things up tremendously. We started out in a new location, hit a couple of places where we'd caught them there in Eldridge Slough and some other places, but we ended up moving all the way down to the far end of the lake, down towards Chester Frost. And we pull in on a little corner that has some grass on it and catch our first keeper right off the bat. But this is already around 11. It actually might have been later after 12. And luckily with that fog delay, we had our check-in time pushed back to like 4:30. So we pick up one there, but nothing else materializes. So we come back to a bluff where there's a channel swing and the current's ripping through there. And you see those two small spots that we catch for keepers. So here we are, we've got one keeper largemouth, we've got two small spots. Then we go back to that one point, that one small slough, and I'll put the picture up here again, and we pull in there about the same time as we had in practice. The wind's right, the fish are right. We pull in there and catch three really quick on that trap, and it makes all the difference in the world putting that in that last part of our rotation instead of earlier in our rotation. So guys, as you practice, you keep those biting windows in your mind. Think about your rotation. Think about how you're going to put those into your game plan for the day. Guys, we'll see you next time on episode 6. We're headed to Boone for the TNCBA Classic. It's going to be a fun one. Kelsey's got to make a comeback. See y'all next time.